What is going on, guys? Welcome to the Upper Hand Fantasy Podcast. I'm Zach Rizzuto. Faraz is not going to make it for today's show, so I'm going to be running this one solo. We got a lot to talk about today before we head into the fantasy football weekend. Week 3 already. It's hard to believe that we're already there. So we just got some action from last night. We're going to be talking about Thursday Night Football, recapping that. We're going to be going over wide receiver and tight end rankings and any other questions that might show up in the chat, while you guys are here watching. So we're going to start at Thursday Night Football. It was last night's game between the Steelers and the Browns. Browns won that one 29-17. In fantasy football, we really weren't expecting this one to be, a big hitter. A lot of fantasy production in this one. The wind was blowing hard. We saw a couple missed extra points. But actually a lot to talk about and a lot to dissect right here from this matchup already. We're just going to go right down the list through all the players that were involved in this game. So we're going to start with the Browns side. Jacoby Brissett, he's kind of looking like he might be worth a start in deeper 2 QB leagues, or if you're, banged up at the QB position, you might be able to stream him and use him as a way to weather the storm for any injuries that your quarterbacks might have. He was on target. He didn't make any mistakes. He threw for 220 yards, 2 touchdowns, really serviceable numbers, things that we like to see moving forward. Nick Chubb, he was great, as usual. Fun watching him run. 23 carries, 113 yards, and a touchdown. It was a good performance. It wasn't the 3 touchdown performance that we saw last week, but it wasn't really what we anticipated seeing anything more than that. Kareem Hunt didn't really rotate in too much. He did get a fair share of carries, but he didn't do very much with it. Average under 4 yards a carry. He did catch 3 balls for 14 yards, but he stayed out of the end zone. It's looking like Nick Chubb is getting a better grip on this backfield than we may have originally anticipated. Kareem Hunt, he can be a good asset for your team, but I'm not sure you want to start him every week after that performance. Week 1 is looking more and more like a bit of an aberration after his 2 touchdown performance. He's been quiet these past few weeks. Nick Chubb is the clear number 1, the guy that they're going to hand the ball to first and foremost while they weather the storm, while Deshaun Watson's out and Jacoby Brissett is quarterback. But Brissett, like I said, is showing that he's capable of producing for fantasy football, and he's not someone that you have to completely avoid. And I wouldn't be afraid to pick him up if he's sitting on your wire because he's been relatively safe option at quarterback. Amari Cooper, this guy, we probably grabbed this guy, Amari Cooper, really late in a lot of drafts. If you didn't grab him because you're worried about Jacoby Brissett, it makes sense. You can't really get dinged for that. But he's produced. He's put up numbers. He's been targeted. He's been one of Jacoby Brissett's favorite targets. He had 11 targets last night, which is humongous. Reeled in 7 of them for over 100 yards again and another touchdown. We love to see that from Amari Cooper. It wasn't, the box score doesn't demonstrate the usage enough. There's actually a play last night where he got a deep pass from Jacoby Brissett, and he was actually ruled out of bounds, and they called an illegal touching penalty on him. So Amari Cooper could definitely produce more than, even that he did last night. The numbers don't do it justice. He's one of Jacoby Brissett's favorite targets, and he's showing why he was such a big name and such a big ad for the Browns this offseason. I like Amari Cooper moving forward. Last week I was wondering if he'd be able to keep up the production, especially against a pretty good Steelers defense on a night where the wind was blowing. But, he kind of laid to rest any worries that we might have had. I had him as a wide receiver 3 heading into the week. I might move him up as a wide receiver 2, especially next week. He has a pretty good matchup. I think Amari Cooper, you can actually slot him in pretty confidently, definitely as a flex. If you have 3 wide receiver spots, he's a great wide receiver 3 with wide receiver 2 upside. I'm not sure he has a wide receiver 1 upside that we might be looking for, but I think that, things are looking good. Donovan Peoples-Jones only had 1 target. Not a big fan of him. He had, people had a lot of high hopes because the receiver room in Cleveland's a little barren behind Amari Cooper, but it doesn't seem like anyone's really separating themselves. David Bell, same thing. The rookie that they drafted this year, 1 catch on 1 target, just 6 yards. Nothing much to see there. It's been a tough ride for any other Browns receivers. The other revelation last night, huge revelation, and that me and Faraz, if you've been listening to the podcast recently, have really been banging away at, is David Njoku. He's been on the field. He's been getting snaps. He's been running routes. His usage hasn't exactly been there, but this week it finally happened. He got 10 targets, caught 9 of them, 89 yards and a touchdown. 9 catches was a career high for David Njoku. And that's just a taste of what he might be able to be, this season as the season moves forward. This guy, he's obviously a great talent, very athletic. He just hasn't seen the targets, and he got him last night. Moving forward, I'd see him as a pretty safe, tight end one, low end tight end one for now, unless this type of production continues. But definitely inspiring compared to what we had seen the previous few weeks from him. And jumping over the other side of the ball, Mitch Trubisky, any fantasy production that he had last night was really salvaged by the rushing touchdown that he had. Otherwise, he was average, mediocre at best. His production isn't something that you want to rely on. I wouldn't want to have him unless you're in some deep trouble at the quarterback position. He is outside my top 24 quarterbacks. And the truth of the Steelers' offense is that it's just not very good. We saw that Najee Harris can't even overcome it. He gets the volume, but he's just not that efficient. Deontay Johnson, you could say, somewhat overcame it because he's just a PPR monster. So that could work. But the Steelers' offense is not going to be very fantasy conducive. They're not going to be scoring a lot of touchdowns. We saw that last night. And moving forward, I mean, even if Kenny Pickett would come in at some point during the season, I don't see the offense being good enough to support consistent fantasy production from any of the players at any position week to week. I mean, you might have a couple of straggler performances like Deontay Johnson. He had a good week this week. Outside of that, I wouldn't really trust anybody. Najee Harris, like I said, I kind of touched on him a little bit, but he had the volume, 15 carries, three targets, 3 receptions. He caught all 3 of his targets. That's 18 opportunities. He did score a touchdown, but we're seeing the same problems come up with him. The inefficiency that we talk about with Najee Harris. He only scored 13 PPR points. He did lose a fumble. Just not looking like the Najee Harris that we saw last year, and not looking like the guy that we drafted high, maybe second round, late second round, early third, potentially this season. He's not looking like the guy that we drafted to be the engine of our offense. And that's kind of been the way it's been with a lot of running backs. But Najee Harris does not look like he is in line for a bunch of huge fantasy days like he was last season. His workload, he was kind of conceding a little work. It was light work that he was conceding to Jaylen Warren, but Warren did make a lot of his opportunities that he got. 4 carries, 30 yards. He did catch a pass for only 3 yards. It could be a lingering injury. We know Najee Harris was coming off that foot injury, and he had been nursing it, and he could have been limited by it this week, and it was a quick turnaround from Sunday. But he's looking more and more like a mid to low end RB2 as things stand right now on this offense, at least. I think his talent is all right. I think he's a good runner. I don't think that this offense is going to allow him to maximize his fantasy potential. So I think that moving forward, you can slot him in as an RB2, but as an RB1, I'm not sure I'd be too happy to have him as my RB1. There are a lot of other running backs that have much higher upside that were being drafted around him, and he just hasn't returned on investment thus far. That's not to say things can't change with the Steelers offense, but I mean, they have the talent. We just saw George Pickens make that crazy catch, the one-hander that rivaled OBJ. But I don't see very many better days for the Steelers offense in the future, especially with Najee Harris. The touchdown ceiling is just relatively low. We're not really going to see much production out of any of these guys. Deontay Johnson, like I said, still didn't get in the end zone. I actually predicted for him to get in the end zone on yesterday's podcast. He did not. He still reeled in 8 catches, 84 yards. Depth of target was good. He was getting pretty much all the looks from Mitch Trubisky. They clearly have a connection, even though, the offense is not where it should be. Deontay Johnson, you can slot him in nicely as a wide receiver 2 every week, high-end wide receiver 2. If he gets in that end zone, we'd be having a much different conversation. He could be edging on borderline or wide receiver 1 territory, but ultimately it is the offense that's holding them back. Chase Claypool, he had a carry. He had 3 catches on 6 targets, 35 yards. He's been pretty much a non-factor in fantasy, and I expect that to continue. George Pickens, unfortunately, I think is in the same situation. Very similar stat line, 3 catches for 39 yards. Not much going on in the Steelers passing game outside Deontay Johnson. And that's kind of what I expected. So you don't really want to have any of these guys starting. I mean, you can have fringe flex value with Chase Claypool in a pinch, but I wouldn't trust any of the guys besides Deontay Johnson in my lineup. I wouldn't be starting them over anybody else. Pat Freiermuth, really disappointing night. We thought that he was going to have high target share. He was showing promise the first 2 weeks. It was, and it kind of fizzled out last night. He didn't get a target until the fourth quarter. He finished actually with 6 points. He had 41 yards. So when he did get the ball, he did produce. But the problem was they didn't get him the ball at all throughout the entire game. So that's not fantasy conducive. We don't want to see that. Moving forward, I still have him as a low tight end 1. I'm not worried about one bad week like this. It was a weird game. I don't think anybody was expecting, even though it was a low scoring game relatively, I don't think anybody was expecting this kind of scoring between them. I think Pat Freiermuth should have got in on the offense earlier in the fourth quarter, but we can complain about what players should have got in, what players shouldn't have got in all night. It's not going to make a difference. That's just the way it goes. Pat Freiermuth, he's a low end tight end 1 going forward. Don't let one bad week turn you away. I don't think there's anything to worry about there. All right, so that about wraps it up for our Thursday Night Football recap. We're going to be moving into the wide receiver tight end rankings, and we're going to see which guys you should be adding to your lineup, which guys you should be pulling out of your lineup, which guys you might be tied up on. You're not sure who you want to start between 2 players. We'll get you those answers now. And remember that these rankings are also available on the Patreon. If you subscribe to the Patreon, you'll get full rankings with blurbs on all the fantasy relevant players. The link is in the bio for this video. We should be good to go. If you aren't on that already, you should sign up. You get plenty of good information from Faraz, from me, and we can get you to win. If you want to win your league and you want to win each week, those rankings will definitely help you to do that. So here we have our wide receiver rankings, starting with number 1, Cooper Kupp. Number 2 is Justin Jefferson. And these two are really a toss-up because they both have pretty good matchups. Cooper Kupp, he's just Cooper Kupp, and Justin Jefferson's Justin Jefferson. Justin Jefferson's coming off of that poor week last week against the Eagles, but he was matched up with Darius Slay. He has a much more winnable matchup, and in a game that has a super high total, point total from Vegas. I think the line's over. I think it's 53 between the Vikings and the Lions. I think that Justin Jefferson is going to have a huge week. He should have a much better week without Monday Night Football, Kirk Cousins throwing him the ball. This is now 1 p.m. slate, Kirk Cousins throwing him the ball. And we saw what happened last time. Justin Jefferson was not with what's called Monday Night Football, Kirk Cousins. He had a monster game, 180-some yards and 2 touchdowns. No reason not to expect him to get back to that, especially against the Lions. They've been in 2 high-scoring games this season, and I expect that to continue this week. Cooper Kupp, Matthew Stafford loves throwing him the ball. As long as Matthew Stafford is throwing the ball, Cooper Kupp is going to get his fair share of targets. There's no reason to worry about him. He's the number 1. Devonte Adams had a rough week last week. He saw 7 targets. It wasn't that bad from a target standpoint, but the quality of those targets was not very good. He only reeled in 2, but he did save his fantasy day. If you want to consider a 9-point performance saving the fantasy day, he did save his fantasy day by reeling in a touchdown right at the goal line from Derek Carr. And that was really all the offense that the Raiders could muster. Darren Waller, he did catch a touchdown, but it was just an off day. It was just a bad day for Devonte Adams. He has a much better matchup this week against Tennessee, who just got murdered. Just got murdered on Monday Night Football. Allowed Stefon Diggs to cook him 3 touchdowns. There's no reason to think Devonte Adams won't do something similar and along those lines. You can plug Devonte Adams in as your wide receiver 1, elite wide receiver 1 this week. The matchup is there. He's good to go. Stefon Diggs, we just mentioned him about cooking the Titans. He should have a good week. There's no reason to think that he can't produce. There's a reason he's one of the best receivers in the league. Stefon Diggs. He is playing against the Dolphins. It's a division game. It might be a little bit tougher. They're playing down in Miami. But there's no reason to worry about him from a fantasy perspective. Josh Allen clearly loves throwing him the football. Gabe Davis does return. He might take a little bit of that workload away. It might not be as focused and as centralized on him. Josh Allen's targets might not be as centralized on Stefon Diggs with Gabe Davis coming back. But there's no reason to think that Diggs won't get his fair share of targets to produce this week. A.J. Brown against the Washington Commanders. He's ranked at number 5, and some people might think that's a little high, but Washington, they got a lot of receivers, and their defense is really it's not fantastic. Just case in point, the Lions tore them up last week, and before that, the Jaguars were actually doing some work on him too. So this is a not very good defense that AJ Brown's going to be going against. He has shown that he can produce even without getting into the end zone. He hasn't scored a touchdown yet. I'd like him to get in the end zone in this game. This kind of harkened back to my prediction on Deontay Johnson. I said the same thing about him. He didn't get in the end zone, so let's hope that this changes. AJ Brown will get into the end zone this week. That's my prediction against the Commanders. And I think he's in line for a huge day, and that's why I have him ranked as number 5. And just a disclaimer as we're going through these rankings are mine. I did come up with these. I produced these. Faraz did not get a chance to look at these. Didn't have a chance to get input on these. So any questions you have for these, you come to me. You don't have to worry about grilling Faraz about why these rankings were so bad or anything like that. You don't have to throw him under the bus. These are my rankings. You can talk to me about those anytime. I'm my Upper Hand Zach account on Instagram. You can reach out to me anytime. I'll answer your questions, talk about rankings, anything you need, that kind of thing. Moving on, Amari St. Brown, we have him ranked at 6. And this might be really high for a lot of people. But the matchup, like I said, against Minnesota, the implied points are crazy in this matchup. It's a high score. It's going to be a high-scoring game. And Amari St. Brown has proven through these first 2 weeks that the end of last season was not a joke. This guy he's a wide receiver 1, a bona fide wide receiver 1 right now. And as long as the Lions offense is tearing it up like they've been the past few weeks, there's no reason to think that he's not going to be producing. He's on a streak of games with 8+ catches. It has reached 8 games, I believe. There's no reason to think that can't get to 9. And as long as we're keeping track of that streak, he's going to be producing for fantasy football. So Amari St. Brown, he's really the only target there in Detroit. People might say, oh, TJ Hawkinson, he's there. He hasn't shown up. And Jared Goff clearly keys in on Amari St. Brown. They actually got Amari St. Brown involved in the run game too. He took his 1 touch last week for a 48-yard gain. So Amari St. Brown showing that he can be used in a lot of different ways, not just in the pass game, but also the run game. All good news for Amari St. Brown and Amari St. Brown owners. I have him ranked as the wide receiver 6 this week. And immediately following him at number 7 is Jamar Chase. You got to think this Bengals offense is going to come back and show what they were last season at some point this season. It's been 2 bad games in a row against the Steelers and the Cowboys, respectively. They're 0-2. Morale is low, but there's no reason to think that the Bengals can't get back online, can't right the ship against a New York Jets team that's been pretty rough against any good offense. They've allowed a lot of offense. They've allowed a lot of points. Jamar Chase should be able to get back on track. He didn't see very many targets last week against the Cowboys because, Joe Burrow was just under duress all day. He was getting the ball out quick and going to his first read. The Bengals didn't have any favors. We talked about this on the other episode. They didn't have any favors done to them when the schedule makers decided to put them against TJ Watt in week 1 and Micah Parsons in week 2. It didn't give the offensive line time to gel. There's no premier pass rusher on the Jets, and I think that's a good thing. The Bengals offensive line will start to gel this week. It'll be a lot better for the offense overall, Joe Burrow, and that'll allow the receivers just a little bit more time to get open. There's no premier pass rusher. The Jets are not a very good team. They have Joe Flacco. They can be in a shootout, and that's exactly what you want as fantasy managers. Jamar Chase, have him ranked at 7. I think that makes sense. Tyreek Hill coming off the big week. He is ranked at 8. He's my wide receiver 8 this week. They are playing against a tough Bills defense, but this is also in Miami, and Miami's at home. And Tua doesn't look like the people that the quarterback that people were questioning all this offseason and last season. He's throwing much more confident, much better, and making use of his weapons, getting the ball in the hands of Tyreek Hill and Jaylen Waddle. Love to see Tyreek Hill this week put in some work. He's going to. The Bills defense is tough, so he's not going to have the upside that he might have against other teams. But Tyreek Hill, he's a safe bet. There's no reason not have him there. There are plenty of other options, but I think he's kind of the edge of the elite wide receiver territory for me for fantasy football this week. We got Deebo Samuel at 9, and this might surprise a lot of people too because he's kind of been quiet. Trey Lance was that quarterback. He got injured, and we saw a little bit of Jimmy G and Deebo last week, and he was still quiet. But getting back to Jimmy G, I think will work wonders for Deebo. Deebo Samuel was excellent last season, as we know, being used in both the run and the pass game. There's not going to be as many design runs at all with Jimmy G now at quarterback. Trey Lance, he had one of the highest design run rates in the NFL prior to his injury. And now with Jimmy G under center, it's going to be going back to what they know best, and that's going to be getting the ball in the hands of Deebo, getting the ball in the hands of Brandon Ayuk. And if George Kittle comes back, Deebo Samuel is in line for some serious work again that he might not have had necessarily with Trey Lance at quarterback. So keep an eye on Deebo Samuel. I have him ranked at 9. I think that he has a lot of upside this week, especially in a matchup where he's playing against a dinged up and a not really good so far, at least compared to what we've expected, Broncos team. Because the Broncos, they have a good defense, but they haven't matched with a team very well on offense. And I think that this could be a higher scoring game. Rounding out the top 10, we have T. Higgins. He came back last week. He did score a touchdown against Dallas, and he might not have been at full strength last week, but he should be this week if there were any lingering effects. Again, they're playing the Jets. I like Joe Burrow and the Bengals offense to get back on track. T. Higgins, he should be a top 10 receiver this week, along with Jamar Chase, as long as everything goes according to plan. But we'll see. They have to take care of things and make sure that they get back on track the way they're supposed to as the Bengals. So if we see the Bengals of old, these rankings, Jamar Chase at 7, T. Higgins at 10, I think they make a lot of sense. So we switch to our next set. We move further into the rankings, starting with 11. We have Michael Pittman. And, I was tempted to put him a lot higher because he had a humongous game in week 1, but then he was injured, and we saw how the Colts offense looked without him. They put up 0 points on the Jaguars. So he's clearly important to this offense, and they're definitely going to get back to using him as soon as they can. Michael Pittman, definitely someone that I want to start this week, regardless of whether he might be, he's coming off the injury. No, don't worry about that. He'll be fine. He'll get his targets. Matt Ryan will be happy to have him back to feed targets to. As long as he gets the targets, he'll produce. He'll be fine. I don't like him as much as other guys. If we go back to the other one, to the earlier rankings, I don't like him as much as the other guys because the offense is just primed. It's designed to rely on Jonathan Taylor, the Colts offense is. So it's not necessarily going to be Michael Pittman making every single play for the Colts like it would be, Deebo Samuel, Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase, these guys up here. So Michael Pittman, I think that having him ranked at 11 also bakes in that injury risk. He might not be 100% as soon as he steps on the field. But I do like Michael Pittman in lineups this week. He should finish as a wide receiver 1. And then our last wide receiver 1 for the week that I'm projecting is Mike Williams. We had him ranked a little bit conservatively last week. I think we had him at wide receiver 18 heading into that Chiefs matchup, and he showed us that he can produce even as a wide receiver 1. He doesn't need the attention taken away from him by Keenan Allen. And Keenan Allen, by the way, we're still not sure if he's going to be playing this week. These rankings are done as if Keenan Allen is not going to play. You could expect Keenan Allen to slide in right around where Mike Williams is ranked right now. Keenan Allen's a low-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2 if he does play. And Mike Williams would be then a low-end wide receiver 2 with high-end wide receiver 2 upside this week if Keenan Allen would play. But as things stand right now, with Mike Williams being the wide receiver 1, he is a wide receiver 1 for this week. There's no reason to think that he won't. Justin Herbert, as long as he plays. There's also questions about Justin Herbert. If he plays, there's no reason to worry about Mike Williams. We saw what he did last week. And he actually didn't get very many catches after the first half last week. Mike Williams got pretty much all of his production in the first half, and then they stopped looking his way. He didn't catch many balls. So if he could get a full game's worth of production, I like Mike Williams for this week. Marquise Brown at 13. The Cardinals, they're such a confusing team because they didn't play well until the end of the game, and then last week, and then the game before that, it was just garbage time points. So we're not really sure what to expect with this Cardinals team. But they're playing the Rams now. They're playing at home. Marquise Brown. I think the Cardinals offense should get right this week and actually look like the Cardinals that we've come to know and love for fantasy football. Marquise Brown is still the number 1 target and one of the only targets there. Greg Dortch is there if you want to consider him a big target hog or something like that. You don't have to worry about him too much taking from Marquise Brown. We haven't seen Marquise Brown hit his ceiling yet. It's taken a little time. And, it could be attributed to the fact that Marquise Brown and Kyler Murray are playing together for the first time in a while. It's going to take a little time for that to gel and start to work together. But Marquise Brown, he should be a good receiver. High-end wide receiver, too, this week. His upside is there. Christian Kirk at 14. I don't think a lot of people are giving Christian Kirk enough credit for what he's doing on the Jags offense. And it's not that the Jags offense is bad and he's just pulling all the weight for the Jags offense and that's it. But a lot of people gave him crap this offseason for the huge contract that he signed, despite the not so awesome production while he was in Arizona. But he's kind of come out and put those haters in their place. He's kind of silenced them, shushed them up. He has 2 touchdowns through 2 weeks, and he's had 2 very good performances as a wide receiver 1 for the Jaguars, and there's no reason not to expect that to continue this week, especially with the Jaguars playing who the Jaguars play? They play the Chargers, yeah. So this could be a high-scoring game. The Chargers were in a couple of shootouts. I do like the Chargers to win this game, but there's no reason to think that the Chargers would get ahead, that Christian Kirk wouldn't get his targets, and he could work in garbage time. And it's shown, too, that he works in a positive game script and a neutral game script. They kept throwing him the ball last week, even though they were beating up on the Colts, and he produced really well. So Christian Kirk, I have him as a high-end wide receiver, too, and he does have wide receiver 1 upside, I think, especially against the Jaguars, not against the Jaguars, against the Chargers, if they would go down. Cortland Sutton at 15. It's been an up and down year, so far, just 2 games, but we saw a very good performance last week and a not so good performance the first week. But the problem is it's just you're waiting for this Broncos offense to get going the way that we expected it to with Russell Wilson at the helm. Cortland Sutton, he got the targets last week. He did produce, but he still hasn't gotten in the end zone. And it's just overall, Russell Wilson hasn't been the Russell Wilson that people expected him to be, and that's what's kind of dragging Cortland Sutton down right now and holding him out of the top 12. But at one of these weeks, it's got to click. And that's what I keep telling myself. But it'll click. You don't have to worry about Cortland Sutton. Even if he doesn't produce the way that we thought he was going to, he's still going to be a solid wide receiver 2 for your team. I have him ranked a little bit higher because Jerry Jeudy may not play this week. We're still waiting to see how that unfolds. And if Jerry Jeudy doesn't play, Cortland Sutton should have the targets all funneled to him. Jaylen Waddle, 16. Tyreek Hill and Jaylen Waddle had a monster week last week, but I think that was an aberration, especially now they're playing against the Bills defense. You wouldn't really expect these guys to have humongous weeks, especially not like last week. Tyreek Hill, I think, is going to be the main target funnel this week. The Dolphins are probably going to be relying on big plays to stay in the game. Not that Jaylen Waddle isn't a deep threat, but Jaylen Waddle's been getting a lot more work target-wise. Tyreek Hill is going to be going over the top. I think Jaylen Waddle's due for it's going to be an all right week, but it's not going to be fantastic. 17, Michael Thomas. I like Michael Thomas. I don't think that Michael Thomas is, he's last week was like indicative of the way he's going to play the rest of the season. It was a tough week for the Saints overall against the Bucs. A lot of targets went out from Jameis Winston, but not a lot of catches, not a lot of true production from the Saints wide receivers last week. I think that you look at Michael Thomas, he'll have a bounce back week this week. They're playing against a pretty bad Carolina team. There's no reason to think that the Saints can't bounce back from last week's performance. And I think Michael Thomas will be a big part of that. I have him ranked up high. He should get in the end zone. There's no reason to think that he won't produce. Deontay Johnson, I had at 18 last week. And I think that's the production that we kind of got. These rankings were put together before Thursday Night Football. I think that 18 was right about, I think it was pretty accurate. He didn't get in the end zone, but he did produce pretty well. He had mid wide receiver 2 numbers, and that's where I had him ranked. That's what I expected going into the matchup, just because the Steelers' offense, it's just not going to be good enough to push him into wide receiver 1 territory at this point in time. If things change, if Mitch Trubisky really picks it up, or maybe Kenny Pickett comes in and offers a spark, we could see this change. But I think for the rest of the season, I'm going to have Deontay Johnson ranked in this range, this 20 to 16 range. And we saw a lot of that last night. So he didn't get in the end zone, but he caught a lot of balls. We talked about him already. 19, I have CeeDee Lamb. you think that maybe you could put CeeDee Lamb lower because the Cowboys offense just does not look the same as it did last season. And we know that with Cooper Rush at quarterback, we saw Cooper Rush key in on Noah Brown over CeeDee Lamb on multiple occasions against the Bengals. But CeeDee Lamb still has the upside. He's a target funnel. He gets a lot of targets, and there's no reason to think that one of these weeks he's not going to break out. This is a divisional game. It should be a close game. CeeDee Lamb should be involved throughout. I don't see Dallas getting down and any positive or negative game script. I think it'll be neutral throughout. But CeeDee Lamb, we know what he can be. We've been calling for the breakout, and it's been on hold for the past few weeks with Dak Prescott out. But Cooper Rush has kind of showed us that, maybe we don't have to work. Maybe we're not benching CeeDee Lamb. Maybe we're not putting CeeDee Lamb completely on the back burner while Dak is out. CeeDee Lamb can still be relevant while Cooper Rush is quarterback. And if CeeDee Lamb could get in the end zone at some point, there's no telling. He could easily have a low end wide receiver 1 week with a high end wide receiver 2 week. I'm kind of betting on the latter. Mid wide receiver 2 is where I have him ranked right now. I don't think his upside is there because of Cooper Rush, but there's no reason to think he can't produce. And Gabe Davis is one of my favorites. I know we always talk about having Gabe Davis in that low, mid to low wide receiver 2 range. That's kind of where I have him right here. He's coming off an injury, his ankle injury. We're not sure how he's going to look coming off that, if he's 100%. But he didn't get very many targets to begin with. He's a big play threat, and that's what you're starting him for each week. He's great as a wide receiver 3. He can be a wide receiver 2. I like him more as a wide receiver 3 this week just because his floor, but his ceiling is definitely up in this range. I like